Bank Station, Bank and Monument, a complex which is near Cannon Street and London Bridge, the Globe Theatre. Bank and Monument are two stations which are interlinked. They're named after two things really, two buildings. One is the Bank of England, and the other building is the monument which Christopher Wren designed to the Great Fire of London. And it is actually a building because there are steps that you can walk up inside. It services 5 underground lines at Bank, plus the DLR, the Docklands Light Railway. January 11th, 1941, during the Blitz, 50 people were killed and over 70 injured when the Central Line ticket hall took a hit from a bomb. The bomb crater, they say, measured over 120 feet by 100 feet. The station was put out of action for quite a few months, but it's not a victim of that terrible accident, that terrible bombing that haunts Bank Station, but it's the ghost of Sarah, who was the sister of Philip Whitehead. Now, Philip Whitehead was a cashier at the old Bank of England. He was arrested in 1911 for forging cheques. He was tried at the Old Bailey, found guilty, and hanged. Now, Sarah, Philip's sister, it really drove her quite mad. By all accounts, for the next 25 years, almost on a daily basis for the rest of her life, she came to the bank every day. Some people say every day. I find that impossible to believe, but she was dressed completely in black. And she would come up to one of the tellers in the bank and say, "Is Philip Whitehead here?" And they would say, "No, ma'am." She came back still with the hope of finding her brother. And for that reason, they say her ghostly apparition has acquired a bit of a name, the Black Nun, they call her. Some people would think that her presence is in and around the station. Some people say the Bank of England's colloquial term, the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street, is named after Sarah Whitehead. But there have been quite a few sightings of Sarah's ghost. Every platform, every corridor, every passageway, somebody has said they've seen Sarah Whitehead. Some people have felt terrible smells, foul, unexplained smells. People have said that they enter the station, Bank Station, and they feel, or they get this overwhelming feeling of anxiety and hopelessness, sadness. But it could just be that Bank Station has and continues to be voted in many polls as one of the most confusing and definitely the most depressing station to find your way in and way in and around in London. Next on the list, Becontree. It's on the District Line, East London Line, opened in 1932. In the 1990s, a station supervisor got very worried when the door of his office started being knocked on, rapped on from the outside. All the passengers had finished their journeys. There were no trains running that night. There were workers working overnight, but the door was seemingly being rattled from the outside. Someone wanted to open it. He felt very uncomfortable, as you can imagine. He went looking around. He opened the door, nobody was there. He went along some of the platforms, some of the corridors. He approached a staircase, and he had this strange feeling that somebody was walking behind him. It's a horrible feeling. And he turned round and he said that in front of him was the image of a woman in a white dress with very long blonde hair, but with no actual face. He said where the face should have been, where the features should have been, there was nothing. He spoke to a couple of his colleagues. One of his colleagues actually said he'd seen the same thing a few weeks before. We don't know why it happened, but we do know in 1958 there was a train collision on that part of the district line. Both trains had left Becontree station just minutes before, and they ended up both trains trying to enter the same track at the same time, and 10 people died in the collision. B is also for Bethnal Green. Bethnal Green, when Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, Bethnal Green station, which is on the Circle line, it was one of the few deep level stations in East London. It became, for a time, an enormous public air raid shelter, situated in what was then a very poor and very overpopulated area. The shelter itself had 5,000 bunks, and at times we have records that said it held up to 7,000 people. It's particularly tragic that the station that had saved so many lives at the height of the Blitz in 1940, where there were 57 days of continuous bombing, that this place also became the site of Britain's worst civilian disaster of the war. It was about 8:17 one evening. Thousands decided to descend on the Bethnal Green platforms. The staircase didn't have a central handrail. The only illumination for those making the descent came from a few small flickering bulbs. It was also raining outside, so the steps were wet and slippery. At 8:27, an explosion was heard. It wasn't a bomb, it was a newly installed anti-aircraft battery that was just being tested in a nearby park, but the noise of the explosion was so loud and so terrifying to those descending that this unease quickly turned to panic. The crowd surged forward. They began to press down the steps. Hundreds of people found themselves being crushed in this narrow, dimly lit stairwell. 173 people died of the crush and of asphyxiation in the stairwell of Bethnal Green Station on that awful night. And the scale of the tragedy, well, it seemed to leave an imprint on the fabric of the station, as the station supervisor in 1981 found out. The last train had departed, and the staff, apart from him, had gone home. He secured the station. He turned off some of the station lights, and he returned to his office to catch up with some paperwork. He hadn't been back there for long. Before, he thought he heard what to him sounded like young children crying, sobbing. The sound of this crying steadily grew louder and louder. He also believed he heard very agitated female voices. And then, a long time later, a crescendo of very loud screams. He said even though he saw nobody, and even though he knew he felt it was in his imagination, he said it sounded like people panicking. And it made him do the same. It went on. He felt, later on he said this, he felt it went on for about 15 minutes. So what did he do? Well, he left his office. He went to the top of the booking hall to get away from it, and years later, he still admits that the experience was something that he would remember for the rest of his life. It's a terrifying situation when you are stuck on a train and you can hear noises outside, or you're on this platform and there's no train around, but you hear noises and you think, where are they coming from? Often you hear strange noises at home and you turn everything off, the TV, the radio, and you say, shush, 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 I need to hear where that's from. And then you realise it's a clock that you had put a new battery in and it's just on a chair. Or your phone is silently vibrating and it's fallen under a cushion. But imagine being here. Imagine being in an empty underground platform and hearing noises, screams and crying. It doesn't bear thinking about. I was asked to explain what I thought of as ghosts the other day by somebody, and I said, well, if ghosts are in purgatory and they haunt a bit, it's like being in the waiting room of a doctor's surgery where you take a number, and you take that number, and if you're number 150 and it's number 30 is being called, you know you've got an hour or so. So you think, oh, I've got an hour to wait, I'll go off and do some haunting before I come back from my appointment with heaven or hell. So ghosts are definitely unfinished business type characters. I thank you for your support. I thank you for any donations. Of course, we do these for free, so it's trying to make a living. You've got a PayPal account, there's a Buy Me a Coffee account. I'll leave you be. Take care.